What's going on, ParaTruthers? Welcome to a brand new episode of ParaTruth Reborn. My name is Justin,
And I'm Eric.
and today is our Halloween episode. So happy Halloween, everybody. Happy Halloween, Eric.
Happy Halloween to you. We've been waiting a whole year for this day.
Yeah. I don't remember if we even, well, no, we didn't do a Halloween
No,
episode
we
last year.
we were going to. That was the plan because we had decided to start our break in August, and I was like, well, we'll come back for a Halloween episode because at that point we were going to do, a couple of episodes here and there over the year when something
Yeah.
significant would happen in the media regarding the paranormal world, and then we just didn't do it.
Yeah.
So
Well, before we get into the topics for today, what are you going for Halloween this year?
Well, I'm going as a dragon because I have to go as a dragon. My niece's request. Dragons and unicorns.
Dragons and unicorns.
Yeah. The guys are dragons and the girls are unicorns. So
No specific reason, just because she
that's
likes
what she
dragons and
wanted.
unicorns.
Yeah, that's what she wanted. It was well, that's what she wanted originally. That was like back in August she decided that. And of course, last month she decided she wanted to do something dressed like a witch or something. But my sister told her no. She had already made up her mind. She got her unicorn outfit, and that's what we're doing. So, yeah. So unicorns and dragons. My mask is on its way.
Ooh.
I did not get the wings like my brother-in-law.
Oh.
I was cheap.
Yeah, we're not sure what we're doing yet. We're probably just going to recycle some costumes and hand out candy this year. This will be the first time we actually do that. So
Nice. Oh, good. I mean,
Yeah.
we always end up handing out candy like at the end of the night. We go out trick or treating for like an hour or two, however long the girls can handle it. They're 2 and 3 years old. So if it's cold night, like last year was really cold. Both my nieces are turning blue after about an hour.
Oh no.
So depending on when we get back, we usually head back to the house and we build a little bonfire outside. We'll pass out some candy, hang out with some neighbors. And of course, every year my brother-in-law makes basically his own homemade hard apple cider, alcoholic apple cider. So we go around the town drinking that. We basically trade alcoholic drinks with neighbors. And yeah, it's a good time.
Trade alcohol.
Yeah, it's a thing, man. It's it's a good time.
Well, the only neighbor we have is 93, and she usually doesn't drink, so probably won't be a thing for us. But all right, today we are going to be talking about the mystery of the three jacks. Now, we've done an episode about this, I think, twice on ParaTruth now. But we wanted to resurrect it for ParaTruth Reborn because it's just an interesting set of circumstances that these three particular jacks are very spooky in nature. Now, the first jack that we had talked about last time, I decided to keep him first this time, is Stingy Jack. Now, if you don't know the legend of Stingy Jack, it's kind of an interesting one. On a chilly night in a quaint Irish village, a notorious drunkard named Stingy Jack resided. His infamy for trickery resonated through twisted alleys and dimly lit pubs reaching far beyond the Emerald Hills. Even the devil heard whispers of his name. On one fateful night, the devil's burning curiosity drew him up from the dark, fiery depths to engage with Jack. Being a wily rogue with a taste for mischief, Jack invited the devil for a pint at a local pub. They savored the bitter ale as the moon climbed higher in the night sky, but when the bill arrived, Stingy Jack, with a twinkle of deceit in his eyes, convinced the devil to morph into a shiny coin for the payment. However, instead of setting the bill, Jack pocketed the coin next to a silver cross, trapping the devil. After an agonizing stint in Jack's pocket, the devil was finally freed under the condition that he would leave Jack untouched for a year. With no other choice, the devil begrudgingly agreed. As the seasons changed and the leaves turned, a year swiftly flew by, and the devil emerged from the shadows. Jack cleverly persuaded the devil to climb a gnarled old tree for a juicy crimson apple. Once he ascended, Jack swiftly etched across into the rough bark, trapping the devil once more. This time, with a voice trembling with the rage and despair, the devil vowed to leave Jack untouched for 10 more years, yet fate had other plans, and Jack found himself facing death soon after. Heaven denied Jack entry for his sinful, mischievous life, and hell, still bound by the devil's vow, reluctantly did the same. Yet with a mocking gesture, the devil tossed Jack a single burning ember from the fiery pits to light his way through the eternal darkness. With a flicker of his cunning, Jack followed hollowed out an old turnip, placed the ember within, and began his endless roam on Earth, marking the inception of, you guessed it, the jack-o'-lantern. Now, when I first heard this legend, and even before I actually kind of read this, I had discovered that jack-o'-lanterns were originally turnips. Do you know why they ended up as jack-o'-lanterns, Eric?
You mean as to why they're jack-o'-lanterns today?
Today,
or
yes.
as we know them?
As we know them.
I mean, aside from the fact that the pumpkins grow, they're indigenous to North America.
That's exactly the reason.
When the Pilgrims came over, boom, they found out actually that the pumpkin had a much more stable platform to actually carve faces into. So that's why they ended up stopping the turnip. Not that they stopped the turnip. There's still plenty of people overseas who still carve turnips just for history's sake. But yeah, the pumpkin was just a better successor, if you will.
Yeah, well, and turnips grow much more predominantly in Ireland because of the climate there. But I'm sure they've adopted pumpkins in certain areas. Yeah. So this was an interesting tale. The Irish are known for their captivating tales, and the story of Stingy Jack is no exception, of course, giving rise to numerous renditions over time. I actually did one as a short story. Maybe I'll post that for you guys to see as well, because it's a pretty good story in my opinion. This tale spurred the tradition of carving faces into turnips, beets, and potatoes among the Irish, who placed these eerie visages on windowsills, hoping to ward off Stingy Jack and other wandering spirits. The tradition sailed across the Atlantic, with Irish immigrants gaining popularity, especially during the potato famine era. So that's where this kind of all took place, bringing it to the U.S., and then we started doing pumpkins for that particular reason, the potato famine, and also pumpkins grew naturally here. It was a little bit easier to get them, and as Eric said, it was easier to carve them as well. When we first did this episode, had you heard the story, or had you heard that it was originally turnips before pumpkins?
No, I mean, growing up, I always thought it was pumpkins. I didn't know until we started ParaTruth and started, or not even ParaTruth, but honestly, back when we were still doing Night Stalkers is when we first really.
I think that's when we first found out about the turnip. I don't know if you heard the Stingy Jack story or not.
Stingy Jack, you know what? I can't remember necessarily either. The only one that I remember from way back then was our Krampus episode, so our Christmas episode. But yeah, Stingy, I think it was probably like 2014. I guess that is my earliest recollection of learning about it.
All right. Yeah, and that same. I remember kind of learning turnips. It might have been during Night Stalkers, not really sure. And then when we did our Halloween episode for ParaTruth, we found out the reason why we have the jack-o'-lantern legend, and why we use jack-o'-lanterns. I always knew that it was because to ward off the evil spirits from Halloween, but and I didn't look this up. You might know this better than I. Halloween, All Hallows Eve, the only reason we really do it that time of the year is because the veil is supposed to be thinner, correct?
Supposedly.
So interesting little story for you guys. That one of my favorites for Halloween, on top of the other two Jacks that we're going to talk about here. But Eric, I'll hand it over to you for the next Jack.
Sure. So we're going to head on over to Spring-Heeled Jack, the Legend of Spring-Heeled Jack. This is one that I think is by far one of the most interesting stories, because this isn't just a typical tale. This is actually like, there's eyewitness accounts. This was in the news, back in the 1830s. So I find it really interesting. We'll talk more about it at the end, get some ideas or thoughts what this person or entity was. And of course, we're going to want to hear your thoughts too, by the way. So at any moment or any time, we'll be in chat. You can feel free to add in your little thoughts, or if you have any knowledge behind this and what the truth is, we'd love to hear that too. So anyway, the Legend of Spring-Heeled Jack. It was about late September of 1837 when the first sighting of Spring-Heeled Jack was first reported. Now, a businessman was returning home late at night in London when he was terrified by the figure of a man who took a huge leap with ease over the high railings of Barnes Cemetery. Now, the mysterious figure landed directly in front of him, but luckily, the stunned businessman was not attacked. He was able, however, to give a full description of a muscular man of devilish features that included large pointed ears and a nose and protruding glowing eyes. Whatever protruding glowing eyes is, like, this is a weird thing. I don't know if they're saying pointed ears and a nose and protruding, as in the nose is protruding, or as in protruding glowing eyes. That's a weird one.
It would be freaky, I think, regardless. But I'm guessing it's talking about the eyes, and a lot of the depictions of Spring-Heeled Jack, his eyes are kind of bulging.
Okay. So, not long after this bizarre encounter, another incident occurred where Polly Adams and her two best friends were attacked by a similar creature. And I want to really examine this keyword creature here. So hold on to that. Which was a creature in which attacked the businessman in front of the cemetery. Only this time, there was an actual attack. Polly was separated from her friends, who ran away, and the muscular man of odd appearance tore at her clothing and scratched her stomach with what she later described as iron-clad fingers. Now, I want to also say ironclad. The word clad here is interesting. Hi, guys. My cats just showed up, my kittens. So if you hear them meowing in the background, I'm sorry. The word ironclad, I think, is interesting because the word clad here, I think, also represents cold. As you'll see in some other depictions here, his hands often are described as being very cold. So anyway, later in October of 1837, London, a servant called Mary Stevens was walking to Lavender Hill, where she worked after visiting her parents in Battersea. Now, when she reached Clapham Common, a strange figure leapt from a dark alley. He managed to trap her within his arms, and as with Polly Adams, the creature, there's the word again, scratched at her with claw-like hands that were cold and clammy as those of a corpse. Frightened out of her wits, Mary screamed, which brought some rescuers running to her aid and her attacker running into the night. Now, these attacks did not go unnoticed, of course, by the press, and it was not long until the attacker was given a number of names, but two of the which that were most famous was the Park Ghost and Spring-Heeled Jack, which, of course, stuck. Now, there were really even official recognition of the attacks, with Sir John Cohen, the Lord Mayor of London, at the time discussing incidents at a public house session on the 9th of January of 1838. Now, it does appear that he was very mistrustful of many reports, as he believed they had been greatly exaggerated. But nonetheless, these are his words that he had said. It appears that some individuals have laid a wager with a mischievous and foolhardy companion, that he durst not take upon himself the task of visiting many of the villages near London in 3 different disguises: a ghost, a bear, and a devil. And moreover, that he will not enter a gentleman's gardens for the purpose of alarming the inmates of the house. The wager has, however, been accepted, and the unmanly villain has succeeded in depriving 7 ladies of their senses, 2 of whom are unlikely to ever recover, but to become burdens to their families instead. Now, at one of the houses, the man rang a bell, and on the servant coming to open the door, this worse than brute stood in no less dreadful figure than that of a specter clad most perfectly. The consequence was that the poor girl immediately swooned and has never from that moment been in her senses. The affair has now been going on for some time, and strange to say, the papers are still silent on the subject. The writer has reason to believe that they have the whole story or the whole history at their finger ends, but through interested motives are induced to remain silent. So here's a little something we've talked about many times, and that's the idea of a conspiracy. In this case, it's in regard to various media's papers in this case, withholding information, trying to hide it from the public eye for one reason or another, probably to refrain from creating some sort of mass hysteria. Did they know more than they let on? Most likely, who this character was, nobody really knows. But the fact that this character was capable of basically scaring women, a couple of women, so much so that they would never recover, they would basically lie ill for the rest of their lives, is an interesting thing. And it tells me it's potentially something more than just human that would have done the scaring. Now, back then, things were a lot different. There was a lot of superstition, of course, in the 1800s. Superstition that was much more not readily available, but I guess taken more seriously than it is today. And so something like a person who's even dressed funny, like the devil in this case, or a ghost or a bear, might get a bigger reaction than what we might get today if that same person, knocked on our door.
Right.
Now, there were a number of letters that came in from all over London, each one telling of a wicked pranks. London was being terrified by an unknown assailant, and the mayor tried to reassure the people of London by telling them that the fugitive would be caught. The Times newspaper went on to print a story from the Brighton Gazette in April 14th of 1838, telling the story of a gardener in Rosehill, Sussex, on the 13th of April about a creature in which it was the shape of a bear or some other 4-footed animal, which I think is curious. It growled loudly, getting the gardener's attention pretty quickly. It then climbed onto a garden wall, running along the top of it on all 4 feet. It leapt down off the wall and then proceeded to chase the terrified gardener for a quick some time until it once more scaled the garden wall and ran off. Now, to think that this creature is all the same person or entity is possible. A bear running along the wall sounds a little weird. Actually, this kind of so for me, when I'm picturing it, I'm starting to picture like a Wolfman type character, climbing the walls, running along the top of it, and leaping onto people. Now, there are 3 accounts here that we do want to talk about, or at least 2. So Jane Alsop's and Lucy Scales. So Jane Alsop, it was about late in the evening of February 20th of 1838 when the 18-year-old Jane Alsop answered her father's front door to a man claiming to be a London policeman. As she opened the door, he yelled out to her, "For God's sake, bring me a light, for we have caught Spring Heel Jack in the lane." She ran back into the house, grabbing a candle, and as she ran toward the strange man, she noticed that he was wearing a long, dark cloak, And as she handed him the candle, he threw the cloak from his shoulders and began to spit out blue and white flames from his mouth. The man grabbed hold of the petrified girl and started to claw at her with his sharp fingers. It was luckily Jane screaming for help that brought her sister running to her side and dragged Jane inside to her father's house. One of the strangest parts of the story was that as soon as the door was slammed shut, the attacker actually knocked on the door again, waiting for a response, but eventually left when no one did. Now, very similar to this account is that of Lucy Scales, which occurred 8 days later on the 28th of February in 1838, when Lucy Scales was attacked around 8:30 p.m. Also, as 18 years old, she and her sister had just finished visiting with her butcher brother living in Limehouse. Now, as Lucy and her sister passed a Green Dragon Alley, they noticed a man standing at the entrance. As the two girls got close, they noticed the man was wearing a long, dark cloak. And then all of a sudden, he grabbed Lucy and vomited a quantity of blue flame into her shocked face, blinding her and frightening her so badly that she suffered seizures like fits. Now, Charles Pritchell would later say that she was suffering from hysterics and great agitation, in all the probability the result of fright. So now that we're here at the end of this story, I think it's really interesting because we have a devil, a bear, a ghost, and a creature dressed in a cloak that spits fire that blinds people but doesn't burn them, apparently. I mean, there's really no explanation. Like, I can't even think of an idea of what this could be other than like some sort of trickster spirit. So then we're kind of moving out the realm necessarily of some sort of cryptid or entity or human being that is doing these things, especially since it's capable of manifesting in a number of different ways, it would seem, assuming it's all the same entity. Now, I think there's a lot of potential as to what this blue flame is, if it was indeed a human being doing this, especially at least for the first story. In terms of Jane Alsop, she brought a candle out, and if this person had alcohol in their mouth waiting for her, he very well could have blew on the candle and create kind of a flamethrower effect. And depending on the type of alcohol the person's using, it could turn the flame blue instead of your typical orange or red. So there is that possibility if we're trying to debunk this. However, as far as we know, there was no fire available during Lucy Scales' account, aside from that which came from his mouth. And the fact that it didn't burn her, but did blind her, tells us it was very bright, and either A, was just super bright, and that's it, or B, it was some sort of chemical that affected her eyes, but not her skin. So, what this creature or person could really be is beyond me, aside from some sort of trickster spirit. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I mean, some of it can be explained away. I mean, people with not nails, but like metal gloves that have sharpened fingertips and stuff like that could explain the claws or claw-like hands scratching. You already mentioned somebody having alcohol in their mouth and blowing on a flame, causing a blue flame. A lot of magicians could probably pull off a lot of these particular acts without it being able to be explained per se. But the animal-like creatures and the quote-unquote devil is a little odd. It could have been somebody in a costume, but if it was running at the speed of these animals, highly unlikely.
Right. Especially on four legs.
On 4 feet. Right. And not that humans can't do that, we just don't.
Right.
So yeah, it's an odd tale, but interestingly enough, like you said, it is brought up in the newspapers and the media's there. So yeah, an odd tale. I had kind of known of Spring Heel Jack prior to us doing the episode years ago, but I didn't know all the legends until we had actually gone over them.
Right. Well, during the time there were quite a few other ideas of what this thing could have been. Everyone was trying to figure out whether it was an animal, a person, or otherwise. And one of my favorite things here that I did find was that there was some speculation that the culprit behind all of this was actually a deranged kangaroo. Yes. It was a deranged kangaroo that was jumping over things and attacking people. Now, they didn't specify as to why or how it would have been spitting fire, but in a way, yeah, I could see a jumping kangaroo. People seeing it as kind of a devilish figure with pointed ears and a pointed nose. But even still, that seems like a weird thing, especially in London.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I believe we had zoos around back then. It's possibly escaped or circus even.
Well, even just it could have just been even like someone rich might have had an exotic
as a pet,
animal,
right? And at that time, England was the ruling body. I think technically they are still kind of the ruling body in Australia. If you're in Australia, please correct me on that. I do apologize. I don't know the politics of Australia and England. But back then, they were, I believe, still the ruling body of Australia. So there would have been that possibility for them to get a hold of a kangaroo.
Right.
Yeah. And the blue flame, that could have just been somebody's fear taking hold. If it was a kangaroo, a deranged kangaroo, a rabid kangaroo. But I don't know, like the description of a bear, that would have had to have been a really fat kangaroo.
Right. And to remain on all fours at all times doesn't quite seem likely.
Right. And I think the only time they travel like that is when they're moving slowly, not
right.
Fast.
And there's no mention of a giant tail or, anything like that. So
you're right.
But then again, once again, who's the cloak figure? It wasn't a kangaroo dressing in a cloak, spitting fire in little, 18-year-old women's hair, face. At least, unless there was some sort of evolution pattern that, died off since then. But
it's an interesting one, and I don't know. It's one of those ones too where it's hard to wipe away any all possibilities of a supernatural being.
Right.
It can be debunked to a certain extent, but unsure for sure.
Right.
Yeah. So again, I don't think either of us really knew anything about Stingy Jack prior to doing our Halloween episode years ago.
Right.
And interestingly enough, Spring Heel Jack is also a comic book character in Marvel Comics, I believe, but I don't think he has jumping abilities or anything like that. So I don't know why they call him Spring Heel Jack, other than he's from the UK.
Yeah, and there is a connection there, and what that connection is exactly, I don't know. But yeah, he has become a superhero since that
time. Apparently Eric has ghosts today.
Or cats running into glass.
All right, so last Jack. If you don't know this name, I do encourage you to Google this because it's one of those learning type experiences as well. So Jack the Ripper. Now, if you don't know Jack the Ripper, here's a little bit of history on Jack the Ripper. He was a serial killer back in the late 1800s. He was linked to specifically 5 murders of women. They were, I believe, all of the, we'll just say, street walking variety of women. There were some dozen murders between 1888 and 1892 that the authorities thought that could have been Jack the Ripper, but they never identified that there was a connection, nor did they ever find Jack the Ripper. But the so-called canonical five victims were Mary Ann Nichols, whose body was found on August 31st, Annie Chapman, who was found September 8th, Elizabeth Stride, who was found on September 30th, and Catherine Kate Eddowes, found September 30th, and Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th. According to common assumption of the time, all the victims were prostitutes, as I said. Kelly was murdered while soliciting on the street. That belief was subsequently taken for granted in books about the crimes, which typically offered conjectures as to the true identity of Jack the Ripper and reported graphic details of the murders he committed. Jack the Ripper, I feel it should be synonymous with murder. If you haven't heard of him before, it was a very odd time in England, and I believe it was during the steam era at that time. There are people that believe that Jack the Ripper was actually an American who came to England, had mutilated these women. In each instance, the victim's throat was cut and the body was usually mutilated in a manner indicating that the murder had at least some knowledge, or the murderer had some knowledge of human anatomy. So they believed he had a doctorate of some kind. One occasion, half of a human kidney was removed, which may have been extracted from the murder victim, but they weren't sure, and was mailed to the police. The authorities also received a series of taunting notes from a person calling himself Jack the Ripper and purporting to be the murderer. I do believe he at one point also left a message on a wall at one of the murder scenes.
I don't know I don't know about the wall. I do know that there is, despite the fact that he supposedly sent in mail. In fact, the whole reason he even got the name Jack the Ripper was because somebody who had sent in mail claiming that he was the killer had signed it with the name Jack, and then Jack the Ripper came into play. But there were a speculation that it was actually the newspaper, certain individuals within the newspaper who were making up these letters and sending them so that they can get more attention later on and help guide people's eyes to this paper and get more sales. So whether or not it was actually Jack the Ripper or just a ploy by the local newspaper to sell paper is still up for debate.
Do you know why whoever it was chose the name Jack?
No, because nobody figured out who it was. They never came forward. They never said, but just based on, I think, the paper that was used and the way something that was written or something, the police had speculated there was a good chance it was just the paper. Someone from, not that the paper themselves said, hey, go do this, but somebody out of their own, on their own time from the paper ended up sending in these things, possibly just for fun.
Well, I can tell you what they speculated why that he called himself Jack.
Okay.
Because that was a common name back then for a man.
Got it.
And then the Ripper, of course, because of the mutilated bodies. Now, the most common cited suspects are Montague Druitt, a barrister and teacher with an interest in surgery, who was said to be insane and who disappeared after the final murders and was later found dead. Michael Ostrog, a Russian criminal physician who had been placed in an asylum because of his homicidal tendencies, and Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jew and a resident of Whitechapel, who was known to have a great animus toward women, particularly prostitutes who was hospitalized in an asylum several months after the last murder. Several notable Londoners of the era, such as the painter Walter Sickert and the physician Sir William Gall, also have been subjects of such speculation. The murder sites have become the locus of macabre tourist industry in London. And if I remember correctly, almost all of these murders, except for one or two, happened in the Whitechapel district.
Right.
So they suspected a Jew because of that fact. Which shows how much prejudice there was even back then for Jewish people. Now, why did we choose these three Jacks? Basically, just the stories themselves. But interestingly, they all have kind of a spiritual connection, because there was the speculation that Jack the Ripper wasn't necessarily insane, but possessed as well. And kind of, sort of sounds similar to Spring-Heeled Jack, except for I don't think they ever described him as jumping over walls in a single bound or anything like that. Just because he targeted women.
Right.
And was terrorizing the area at the time.
Well, and I myself was drawing some lines to Spring-Heeled Jack, between Jack the Ripper and Spring-Heeled Jack. But at the same time, it's also a 50-year difference here. So if the Ripper was indeed the same person, he would probably be in his 60s or 70s at the earliest or the youngest, assuming Spring-Heeled Jack was a young man or woman, because we really don't even know if Jack the Ripper was a man, but yeah, so there are definitely some lines drawn there, but that 50-year difference that's a big number.
Well, and it shows the sexism of the times too, because I'm sure there was plenty of women that would have known anatomy back then, but it wasn't in their class to know all of that, or be doctors for that matter.
Well, yeah. Well, and also, like, someone signed it Jack. Hey, I know plenty of women named Jacqueline who go by Jack.
Right.
It's like, that could have been a good, maybe she was trying to push them off and make them think it was a man, really throw them off her trail. But
there are a lot that believe that H.H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper as well.
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is. And, there's some good similarities there as well. The only problem is the murders of Jack the Ripper were actually happening at the same time that H.H. Holmes was committing murders in the U.S. So that kind of debunks that.
But was it like the exact same dates?
Even if it wasn't, the only way to get from point A to point B was via the sea, and that would have taken weeks. So they were pretty close, some of those murders.
Okay. We had a guest on when we had first done this episode that claimed he knew who Jack the Ripper was. Yeah. I don't know that either of us were convinced that was the case, but
no, I wasn't convinced, but it was definitely an interesting suggestion. And, some of the evidence seemed to be sufficient, and others are like, you're kind of pulling there. I felt like, but for anyone who's interested in actually checking out that episode, if you want to know who might be Jack the Ripper, you can just go into Spreaker or, wherever you find a podcast, and just under the search, type in Jack the Ripper and it'll come up. It's called Jack the Ripper Mystery Solved with Randy Williams. I believe he wrote a book on that, or maybe I can't remember if it was a book or if it was just a publication that he had online.
I think it was just an online thing, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But yeah. So yeah, definitely check that episode out. It was an interesting conversation. I'll say that, because it was one that a theory I had never heard before. And yeah, I think with the Spring-Heeled Jack thing, I think that's kind of why I linked it to this particular episode we did. Not to mention, 3 particular cases, or not cases, stories where it involves somebody named Jack. Now,
Right.
yes, Jack the Ripper was a real serial killer. Spring Hill Jack was reported in the newspapers. Stingy Jack, it's just a tale as far as we know.
Right.
But anything else we need to add about the 3 Jacks?
No, not in particular. I don't think. I feel like when it comes to the tale of Stingy Jack, it's an interesting one considering the Jack o' lanterns beginning or origin story. Which, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, Jack o' lantern actually means Jack of the Lantern. And so in that case, it is Stingy Jack, who is of his lantern, who has his lantern. That's where we kind of get that name from. But with many various belief systems out there, again, some will say that the jack-o'-lantern was created because of Samhain to ward off evil spirits specifically. This particular legend comes from the Irish, but there are other legends that come from other areas around the world. Now we can of course go in and do the history track and see which one was
Right.
proclaimed earliest, but in the end I don't think it really matters because of what we know of it today. I mean, today most people carve lanterns because they're fun. They're meant to be a part of the commercialism of Halloween. What I think I love about about us and about the people that we are friends with within the paranormal world is how much history and realism there actually is within Halloween, because it's not about the commercialism only for us. It was growing up, but now
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
when I'm sitting in front of a bonfire on Halloween night, or I'm carving a pumpkin, I'm thinking about the history of why bonfires were lit on the night of Samhain and why the pumpkins were placed on windowsills or in front of houses. I'm thinking of why we give out candy, based on the Catholic origin of giving out food on Halloween night. So there's a lot of really interesting and rich history within Halloween that I think is important to hold on to and understand while still being able to enjoy the festivities of the holiday.
Oh, for sure. The one thing that I had to chuckle at about the legend of Stingy Jack was how stupid the devil was portrayed.
Yes, that was something I thought about as well. This menace, the devil, obviously, in many cultures, not just Christianity, has been really recognized. And of course, we'll say demons for some, because some don't recognize the devil, but recognize demons. But the way that they're recognized as being, mischievous, malicious, uh, being just downright evil and so wise beyond understanding. They're the trickers. They're the one who, weave the pattern for people to fall into sin or death or whatever it is that they're doing based on your belief system or culture that you live in. And yet to see a person who was able to convince the devil to climb a tree and get him an apple, like, I think it was done on purpose by somebody who created that story to belittle the idea of
Could
the
be.
devil.
Represent the pride that the devil has too, that he can't be
That is
swayed.
also that is also a possibility. And I mean that kind of goes along the lines with so many things that we've seen within pop culture of the devil. One of my favorite songs is "The Devil Went Down to Georgia." And that one kind of portrays his pride and why he felt he lost. The battle that he was in, and it was due to his pride. He thought he was better. No one could outbeat him at playing music because that's what he was created to do. But then in this case, he did lose. So yeah, you're right. It probably does kind of refer in some sense to how pride always comes before the fall, if you will. But nonetheless, to be tricked twice is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what caught my eye out of that entire story, was just the fact that not just once, but twice,
Yeah.
and both times with a cross.
Well, and here's the other thing that I thought, and maybe I'm thinking too much into it, but like you can't climb down the tree because the cross is embedded in the tree. But can you not jump off the tree to the ground because you're no longer touching the tree? Therefore, anything that is surrounding the cross that isn't the tree isn't actually considered, a
Well, not
holy
only that,
thing.
but a tree has multiple sides. He
Well,
would have
that is
had to
also
put crosses all the way around the base of the tree
we're
in order for
punching
the devil to be trapped
holes
up there.
in Stingy Jack. We're gonna have to whenever I die, many years down the line, I'm gonna go find the creator of Stingy Jack, and I'm gonna like start poking holes in all his little his story.
I hate to tell you, but he's probably dead. Or are you talking about your soul is going to go meet
No, my
him
soul.
somewhere?
Yeah, my soul is gonna go.
Yeah, interesting tale. I love the tale. And to kind of learn where the jack-o'-lantern kind of got its origin is just awesome, just because I think both of us have loved Halloween from a very young age.
Oh yeah.
Not too many kids don't, but
very few continue to love it as they grow up.
very true. Very true. All right, folks, that ends October already.
Incredible.
I hope you guys enjoyed this. We got a lot more stuff coming, so stay tuned. Next month, we'll just be kind of doing some random paranormal stuff because there isn't a whole lot that has to do with Thanksgiving and the paranormal.
No.
We might revisit a couple of our old episodes for that too.
Yeah. I mean, I off the top of my head, I'm thinking of a few that we've done over the years for November that I think would be fun. But I know the next episode we're going to do, and it's all about UFOs and aliens. So that'll be, of course, a fun episode. So keep in tune for that. A lot of things happening lately over the course of the year in terms of UFO sightings.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
Something to look forward to. I think that's going to just become more and more prominent within our lives.
Absolutely. And that's something I mentioned to you about that episode is even if we do not do it right away, guess what? We've all got smartphones. We're all taking videos now. There's going to be a lot more to talk about.
Right.
So until next week, folks, where you will find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric. Peace.